last train to the abandoned school, and I couldn't wake up. The announcement was polite and wrong. Last train to the Eastline. It wasn't the route I remembered, but it was late, and I was tired enough to ignore the difference. The car smelled of old leather and wet coats. The lights hummed with the tired steadiness of something kept alive by habit. I tucked my hands into my coat pockets without thinking and found the brass watch there, warm from my palm. The other seats were empty, the windows reflecting a city that passed like a smear of sodium streetlights. Outside, the map of the night folded into a single stop I did not expect. Halfway through the trip, the car hissed, and the lights dipped as if taking a breath. The conductor's voice returned, soft and practiced, but when he spoke, a name came out like a bell inside my skull, one I hadn't heard in years. I stood without quite deciding to, and moved toward the door because the platform outside would be closer than the small, pressurized world inside the train. I remember thinking, absurdly, that doors being open at this hour meant kindness. The train stopped at a name that belonged to my childhood neighborhood, but everything outside looked as if someone had draped the place in sleep. The platform was the kind of space that makes a person aware of their breathing. It was too wide for the few lamps that scattered their halos across puddled concrete. The old station clock hung crooked and stopped, its hands clinging to 13 minutes past some hour. Beyond the lamplight, a red brick mass rose. The school, shuttered windows like closed eyes, an overgrown courtyard folding back into shadow. The bell tower's silhouette cut into the sky like a question mark. My footfalls sounded too loud, as if someone was listening for them in the empty hallways inside my skull. I told myself I'd only look, just confirm the place was as deserted as it read in council minutes. The gate to the school's entrance hung on a single hinge and sighed when I pushed, the metal complaining in the same breath as the wind. Inside, the corridor breathed dust. Lockers leaned in a lazy, tired stagger. Their paint was pitted and their numbers blunted by time. Crayon drawings were taped to a bulletin board, laughably cheerful in a palette the dust had washed into resignation. I ran a fingertip along one drawing, and the color left a ghost on my skin. The brass watch felt heavier in my pocket after that. It had an engraving I couldn't read in the dimness, like something half-remembered that wanted to be finished. I sat on a low bench under the boarded windows and tried to orient myself. When had the school emptied out? Why did the corridors still keep the shape of footsteps? My eyes kept tugging toward the bell tower, a muscle of memory uncoiling. Every now and then, I thought I heard a shove of laughter or the scrape of a shoe against tile. But when I stood quickly, the sound cut off, as tidy as a switch being thrown. There's a strange etiquette to places that used to require children's voices. You approach them as if you might break an agreement. I walked past a classroom with its door propped open by a cracked ruler. Desks were arranged in a tired choreography. A lone apple of dust sat on one desk like a tiny, patient planet. Something in me wanted to correct the angle of a chair, straighten the world into what it should have been. Instead, I found a folded piece of paper lying on the floor, no name. Only a sketch of a train with a tiny figure standing at its door. The figure had no face, watch in my palm ticked or didn't. Time had the soft, plastic quality of a dream where clocks behave like props. I pressed the crown and felt a tiny give, like the hinge of a lid that had been coaxed open too many times. Outside, somewhere distant, the bell tower gave a note that sounded more like a memory than a sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for ears. It vibrated the clean lines of the corridor and left me hollow, like a glass that had been struck and would not stop singing. I realized, with a cold clarity, that the doors I'd walked through might not open the same way back. I found the old gym by accident, following a corridor that seemed to fold. The varnish on the floor had long since forgotten polish, but at center court, a circle of scuffed wood kept its story. A faded banner hung like a flag of surrender. The pale conductor stood by the bleachers, where he hadn't been moments before, his uniform too clean for the place. He smiled without moving his lips and did not wave. He checked his watch as if it belonged to someone else and said softly, "You shouldn't be here at this hour." The words were ordinary and felt like a verdict. I didn't want to answer, because answers anchor you to the world you already know. Instead, I asked how long the school had been closed. The conductor looked at me in a way that made my throat remember names I hadn't spoken. "Long enough," he said. "Long enough that the building learned to keep its secrets to itself." There was a pause like the exhale between two train routes. Then he tilted his head toward the exit that led back to the platform. But when I stepped through, the station clock showed a minute later than when I'd seen it last, and an extra lamplight had gone out. The first time I tried to leave, the door wouldn't hold a straight memory. I pushed, and the frame shivered like a held breath. The corridor beyond opened to the platform, and then folded into a closet full of coats that weren't mine. I laughed once, hysterically small, because laughter is a small way of bargaining with fear. When I drew my hand from a coat's pocket, the fabric smelled of chalk and an old after-school syrup, scents my body recognized from a life that had moved on. The watch in my hand stopped mid-tick and then kept going, as if listening. Were moments, small islands where the world felt salvageable. I would sit on the platform bench and watch a train's distant lights draw a slow, geometrical line through the darkness. For an instant, I believed I could return to the compartment, step on, and let the city drag me back to the life that insists on nagging continuity. Bills unpaid, an email to send, the humdrum of a refrigerator. But the city beyond the platform had the same softness as a photograph left too long in the sun. Edges bled. Even the thought of routine felt borrowed, like someone else's habit. When I dozed, it wasn't a clean sleep. It was the kind that slides sideways into memory. I dreamt of a classroom where a child drew trains with faces, the chalk smudging into a portrait of me at the window. In that dream, there was a younger version of myself who kept saying small things I had forgotten to say out loud. The bell rang somewhere close enough to unstick the dream for a moment, and I woke with the taste of chalk in my mouth and my hand still holding the watch. My phone, when I checked it, said no new messages. Time had the courtesy to lie. At some point, the architecture of the school stopped behaving like wood and stone and began to behave like memory. Hallways looping back on themselves, a staircase descending into a corridor that led to the roof leading to a classroom. Each turn nudged a different year at me. First grade spelling bees, a physics lab's quiet calculations, an art class where laughter stuck to the ceiling. Those years were not chronological. They stacked like playing cards and collapsed when I breathed. The more I tried to force one door, the more doors multiplied until comprehension thinned to a fine, worrying thread. I thought at some small dignity that I could anchor myself with something physical. I tightened my fingers around the watch, finding the engraving clearer by touch. 3 initials and a date I half recognized as a graduation year. A sound like a page turning came from somewhere beyond comprehension. The conductor watched me with a patience that wasn't unkind and said, "You can't wake up if you don't let go of what wakes you." It was advice and accusation all at once. I wanted to ask him for a map, or a schedule, or the polite lie that would let me sleep properly at home. Near the bell tower, I found a small office filled with artifacts of attendance. Sign-in sheets yellowed at the edges, a jar of pens stiff with age, a clipboard with a single pen loop. A photograph lay face down on the desk. When I turned it over, the image was of the platform and of me, standing at the open door of the train. Only I was younger there, and smiling like someone who had not yet learned the anatomy of regret. I could not tell whether the photo was from before or after I arrived. The answer slipped like a fish between my fingers. The air shifted when I reached the bell. Up close, it was more bone than metal, its surface pitted with weather and names carved like petitions. The inscription around the rim was half worn away. I could read only fractured phrases. I put my palm against it and expected a roar, a sound to cut through the soft sleep of the building. Instead, there was a warmth that ran into my hand, the feeling of a presence that had been waiting for someone to remember the right cadence. In that warmth, I understood, briefly and without clarity, that the school did not haunt like a ghost. It kept company like a patient animal. After the bell, the thin veil between waking and sleep trembled. I tried to stand and found my legs heavy, as if filled with rain. The watch's hands, which had obeyed no clock for hours, spun once and stilled, pointing at a minute that was both old and new. I thought of all the small promises one keeps to oneself, the calls not returned, the apologies not made. As if the school could be reasoned with, I offered those promises into the corridor like coins. Sometimes the building took them. Sometimes it returned a whisper in a child's voice, only enough to bruise the heart with the memory of a different life. When I finally staggered back to the platform, the train waited as if it had never left. Its lights were steady, the door open like an invitation with no expectation. I stepped aboard with the reflex of someone who knows the shape of the world and wants it back whole. The car smelled of the same wet leather, but now the reflection in the glass was layered, the city outside and the school inside, superimposed like double exposure. I sat, buttoned my coat, and when I reached for the watch, the engraving was gone. The metal was cool and blank, as if it had never held memory at all. The conductor passed with practiced steps and did not look at me. When he finally spoke, it was to wish me a quiet night and to tell me the next stop. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had been reading from a manual. I I tried to speak, and the words came out many breaths late, layered with syllables that belonged in other years. As the train pulled away, the platform receded, and with it the outline of the bell tower. I thought then that I had left the place behind, but there is a way a memory sits in a pocket. Lighter, yes, but not gone. Something in me knew I would wake again to its corridors. When I woke up days later, or hours or minutes, my phone was on the table, battery half drained. A single missed notification from a friend asking if I was all right. I told myself the right answers, rehearsed, ordinary, and put on the face that advances adulthood. It's fine, I'm fine. But at night, when the city dims and the train's humming becomes a memory, the watch, the bell, the faceless drawing return like a song without a chorus. The ending of the story never arrives neatly. Sometimes the last train still stops at the abandoned school for reasons you cannot file away. Sometimes you sleep and find you cannot wake.